Adam Peter Lanza was born on April 22, 1992, in Kingston, New Hampshire. From an early age, he struggled with communication and sensory difficulties. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and obsessive-compulsive disorder, Adam lived much of his life withdrawn and isolated. By the time he was 20, he rarely left his room and spoke to his mother, Nancy Lanza, mostly by email. She was a gun enthusiast, keeping several firearms in their Newtown, Connecticut home. On the morning of December 14, 2012, Adam shot and killed his mother by a .22 caliber rifle as she slept. Before leaving the house, Lanza destroyed his computer's hard drive, an act that would make evidence gathering difficult for law enforcement personnel. He then drove her car to Sandy Hook Elementary School, where he had once been a student. Armed with a Bushmaster XM15 rifle and 2 handguns, he arrived just after 9:30 a.m. and shot through the school's locked front doors. Within minutes, he murdered 20 children, most only 6 or 7 years old, and 6 adults, including Principal Dawn Hochsprung and school psychologist Mary Sherlach, who ran toward danger to protect their students. Teachers like Victoria Soto and Anne-Marie Murphy died shielding their children. Some students survived by hiding in bathrooms and closets, remaining completely silent as gunfire echoed through the halls. By 9:40 a.m., the final shot was heard. Adam Lanza had taken his own life. Police entered minutes later, finding scenes of unimaginable horror. Investigators determined the attack lasted less than 5 minutes and that Lanza acted entirely alone. Reports later revealed he had become obsessed with previous mass shootings and had easy access to his mother's legally owned guns. The tragedy of Sandy Hook shook the United States to its core. It reignited fierce debates over gun control, mental health, and school safety. Proposals for universal background checks and bans on high-capacity magazines gained momentum, but deep political divides stalled major reform. Even today, the memory of Sandy Hook stands as one of America's darkest reminders of the urgent need for change. Sung-Hee Cho was born on January 18, 1984, in Asan, South Korea. When he was 8, his family moved to the United States, hoping for a better future. They settled in Centerville, Virginia, where his parents ran a small dry cleaning business. From a young age, Cho struggled deeply. He was painfully shy, rarely spoke, and was later diagnosed with severe anxiety, selective mutism, and depression. In school, he was often bullied and isolated. Teachers remembered his silence and disturbing writings filled with violent themes. By the time Cho entered Virginia Tech as a creative writing student, his behavior had grown darker. Professors and classmates noticed his anger and detachment, but no one realized how dangerous he had become. On April 16, 2007, everything changed. At 7:15 that morning, Cho shot 2 students, Emily Hilscher and Ryan Clark, inside West Ambler Johnston Hall. Then, after returning to his dorm to reload and mail a manifesto to NBC News, he headed to Norris Hall. Around 9:45 a.m., he chained the doors shut and opened fire in classrooms and hallways. Within 9 minutes, 30 more people were dead and 17 were wounded. When police finally broke through the doors, Cho ended his own life with a gunshot to the head by Norris 211. The investigation revealed he had planned the attack for months, practicing at a firing range and buying 2 pistols legally, despite a court order for mental health treatment. A review panel later found major failures in the university's response and in Virginia's background check system. However, the university later reached an $11 million settlement with many of the victims' families. In the aftermath, the tragedy forced America to confront deep flaws in mental health care and gun control. The Virginia Tech shooting remains the deadliest school shooting in U.S. history, a haunting reminder of what happens when warning signs are ignored. Stephen Paddock. Stephen Craig Paddock was born on April 9, 1953, in Clinton, Iowa. He was the oldest of 4 brothers. When he was 7, his father, Benjamin Paddock, a bank robber, was arrested and later escaped prison, ending up on the FBI's most wanted list. He lived a comfortable life in Mesquite, Nevada, and was known by casino staff as polite, even generous. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. In the years before 2017, his wealth declined, his relationships grew distant, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. On September 25, 2017, Paddock checked in to 2 adjoining suites on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas. From those windows, he could see the Las Vegas Village, where over 22,000 people would soon gather for the Route 91 Harvest Country Music Festival. Over the next several days, he carefully prepared. He brought in 24 firearms, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and devices known as bump stocks, attachments that allowed his semi-automatic rifles to fire almost as fast as machine guns. At 10:05 p.m. on October 1st, as country singer Jason Aldean performed on stage, Paddock broke his windows and opened fire from above. Bullets rained down on the crowd below. Chaos spread as people ran for cover, unsure where the shots were coming from. In just 10 minutes, more than 1,000 rounds were fired. 60 people were killed, and over 400 were wounded. Panic and stampedes brought the total number of injured to nearly 900. When police finally breached his room over an hour later, they found Paddock dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had set up surveillance cameras to watch his hallway and left behind notes calculating bullet trajectories, but no explanation for why he did it. The investigation concluded he acted alone, with no ties to extremist groups or clear motive. The tragedy remains the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in American history. In its aftermath, the U.S. banned bump stocks in 2018, an attempt to prevent such rapid-fire attacks again. Though the ban was later overturned, the horror of that night reshaped how America views safety, law enforcement response, and the urgent need for stronger gun reform.
Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Eric David Harris was born on April 9, 1981 in Wichita, Kansas. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born a few months later on September 11, 1981 in Lakewood, Colorado. They met in middle school after Eric's family settled in Colorado, and by high school they were inseparable. Both were bright but troubled. Eric was charismatic and manipulative, often masking deep anger. Dylan was quiet and depressed, struggling to fit in. Together, they became lost in violent fantasies and resentment toward the world around them. By May 1998, they began planning an attack that would shock the nation. For nearly a year, they built homemade bombs and gathered firearms through friends. They recorded videos and wrote journals outlining their motives, Eric's hatred for humanity and Dylan's despair over life itself. On April 20, 1999, they arrived at Columbine High School armed with shotguns, a carbine rifle, and explosives. The chosen date, April 20, was Adolf Hitler's birthday, which they marked in journals, but they were not necessarily motivated by Nazism. Their primary goal of the attack was not a shooting, but an explosive attack. They planted 2 large propane bombs in the school's cafeteria, intending for them to detonate during the busiest lunch period and collapse the library above. When their cafeteria bombs failed to detonate, they turned their guns on classmates and teachers. At 11:19 a.m., they opened fire outside the school before moving inside. Within minutes, they had killed 13 people, 12 students, and 1 teacher, and wounded 23 more. Most of the victims died in the library, where the pair later took their own lives at 12:08 p.m. Police surrounded the building, but faced chaos and uncertainty. The investigation revealed a chilling level of preparation and a mix of psychological issues. Eric displaying traits of psychopathy, Dylan consumed by depression. Their motives were never fully understood. In the aftermath, the word Columbine became synonymous with school shootings. The tragedy changed America, sparking national debates about bullying, mental health, and gun control.
Omar Mateen. Omar Mir Sadiq Mateen was born in New Hyde Park, New York in 1986 to Afghan parents and raised in Florida. To most, he appeared quiet, a security guard with a wife and young son. But beneath that calm exterior was a man growing more angry, confused, and unstable. In the early hours of June 12, 2016, Mateen drove to Pulse, a popular gay nightclub in Orlando, on a night celebrating Latin music. Around 2 a.m., with over 300 people still inside, he entered carrying a Sig Sauer MCX rifle and a Glock 17 pistol. Within minutes, the music was drowned out by gunfire. Dozens fell where they danced. Survivors described chaos, screams, and the desperate scramble to hide. As police rushed to the scene, off-duty officer Adam Grueller exchanged fire with Mateen before the gunman retreated into the club's bathrooms, taking hostages. Over the next 3 hours, Mateen called 911 several times, swearing allegiance to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and claiming his attack was revenge for U.S. airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. He told negotiators, "Tell America to stop bombing my country." At dawn, police made their move. A SWAT team breached the building with an armored vehicle. At 5:14 a.m., Mateen opened fire again and was shot dead moments later. 49 people were killed and 53 wounded. It was the deadliest terrorist attack on U.S. soil since 9/11 and the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history at the time. The FBI later determined Mateen acted alone, inspired but not directed by ISIS. His motive blended ideology, rage, and personal turmoil. The tragedy led to renewed calls for gun reform and tighter background checks. It also prompted new safety measures for first responders and emergency training programs nationwide. In Orlando and beyond, memorials rose in rainbow colors, symbols of grief, resilience, and love stronger than hate.
Nicholas Jacob Cruz was born on September 24, 1998, in Margate, Florida. Adopted at birth by Roger and Linda Cruz, he lost both parents before turning 19. By the time he was orphaned, his life had already been marked by anger, violence, and deep emotional instability. Teachers had raised alarms for years. He was obsessed with weapons, made threats online, and spoke often about killing. Despite dozens of warnings to police and the FBI, no action was taken. On February 14, 2018, Cruz took an Uber to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, a place he once attended but had been expelled from. It was 2:19 p.m. when he arrived, carrying an AR-15-style rifle and a backpack filled with ammunition. Within minutes, he began shooting inside Building 12. He killed 17 people, 14 students and 3 staff members, and wounded 17 others in just under 4 minutes. As terrified students fled, the fire alarm blared, adding to the chaos. Cruz then dropped his weapon and slipped away by blending in with the crowd. An hour later, police arrested him in Coral Springs without a struggle. The attack became the deadliest high school shooting in American history. Soon after, a wave of anger and grief spread across the nation. Survivors formed the Never Again MSD movement, demanding stricter gun laws. Under public pressure, Governor Rick Scott signed the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act on March 9, 2018, raising the minimum gun purchase age to 21, imposing waiting periods, and allowing trained teachers to carry firearms on campus. The police response was heavily criticized. Deputies failed to confront the shooter and ignored earlier warnings about his behavior. Several officers resigned, and Sheriff Scott Israel was removed from office. Years later, Cruz pleaded guilty to 17 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole in 2022. The Parkland tragedy reshaped America's conversation about mental health, school safety, and gun violence. It sparked a youth-led movement that refused to stay silent and remains one of the most powerful calls for change in modern U.S. history.
Salvador Ramos. Salvador Rolando Ramos was born on May 16, 2004, in Fargo, North Dakota, and grew up in Uvalde, Texas. As a child, he was bullied and withdrawn, often keeping to himself. By his late teens, he had grown increasingly isolated, angry, and fascinated with violence. Ramos posted disturbing threats online, abused animals, and showed off pictures of rifles. He legally bought 2 AR-15-style guns soon after his 18th birthday. On the morning of May 24, 2022, after arguing with his grandmother, Celia Gonzalez, about not graduating high school, Ramos shot her in the face. She survived, and while neighbors called police, he fled in her truck, crashing it near Robb Elementary School, his former school. Dressed in black and armed with an AR-15 rifle, he entered through a door that failed to lock and walked into adjoining classrooms 111 and 112. Inside, he opened fire on 4th grade students and their teachers, Irma Garcia and Eva Morales. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. 17 others were injured. For 74 agonizing minutes, terrified students hid, played dead, and whispered to 911. Outside, parents pleaded with police to go in. Officers waited in the hallway, mistakenly treating the scene as a barricaded situation rather than an active shooter. This resulted in an inexcusable 74-minute delay in confronting the shooter. At 12:50 p.m., Border Patrol agents finally breached the classroom and killed Ramos. The tragedy sparked nationwide outrage, focused not only on the horrific act itself, but on the delayed police response. Investigations later called it a systemic failure of leadership and training. In the aftermath, Uvalde grieved deeply. Memorials filled with flowers, candles, and crosses surrounded the school. One teacher's husband, Joe Garcia, died 2 days later of a heart attack, overcome by grief. A month later, President Joe Biden signed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most significant gun reform in nearly 30 years. Robb Elementary was closed permanently. a symbol of loss and a call for change across America.
Charles Whitman. Charles Joseph Whitman was born on June 24, 1941 in Lake Worth, Florida. From the outside, his life seemed promising. He was bright, polite, and gifted, a child prodigy with an IQ of 139, an Eagle Scout at just 12, and a talented marksman trained by his father. But behind closed doors, home life was filled with violence. His father, Charles Sr., was controlling and abusive, and his mother, Margaret, endured years of suffering in silence. After graduating from high school in 1959, Whitman escaped home by joining the U.S. Marines. He served honorably, earning medals for marksmanship, but his temper and gambling got him court-martialed. When the Marines sent him to study mechanical engineering at the University of Texas, his academic and personal life began to unravel. By the mid-1960s, he was abusing amphetamines, struggling with headaches, and battling violent impulses he didn't understand. On July 31, 1966, he wrote a chilling suicide note, describing strange thoughts he couldn't control and asking for an autopsy to find out why. Hours later, he murdered his mother and wife, believing he was sparing them future pain. The next morning, August 1, 1966, Whitman arrived at the University of Texas Tower with rifles and ammunition. After killing 3 people inside, he climbed to the 28th floor observation deck and began shooting at random. For 96 terrifying minutes, bullets rained down on students and bystanders below. 17 people were killed and 31 wounded before police officers Ramiro Martinez and Houston McCoy stormed the tower and ended his rampage. An autopsy revealed a brain tumor pressing on his amygdala, possibly influencing his violent behavior, though no clear link was proven. The tragedy shocked America. It was one of the first modern mass shootings, forcing law enforcement to rethink crisis response and raising questions about mental illness, gun access, and untreated trauma, issues that still echo across the nation today.
Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts on any of the mass shootings I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 2, or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.